One of the most mysterious incidents in recent history has to be the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines flight MH370. How does an entire plane just vanish? And why did it veer off course? Who was responsible? Well, today we're doing a deep dive looking at some of the darkest mysteries and facts surrounding this plane's disappearance. We're going to start off with the obvious. The wreckage has never been found. MH370 vanished from radar screens on March 8, 2014, while flying from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. The plane disappeared from radar screens less than an hour after it took off, and we still don't know the exact fate of the plane or the 239 people aboard. It's believed, though, that the plane crashed somewhere in the Indian Ocean, but without the physical evidence, there's still some speculation. Now, there have been small bits of debris that could have been from the plane, but not 100% certain, and that's pretty unsettling. Not only does it just fuel all the conspiracies behind this case, but it also has prevented the families of the missing passengers from having any real closure. There's always going to be that thought in the back of their minds saying, well, the plane's never been found, so there's a small chance they could have survived. And holding on to hope like that, as tiny a shred as it is, it just prevents people from moving on and accepting the situation for what it is, and that has to be maddening. Next on the list, we have the communication shutdown. One of the biggest questions about this case is whether or not the plane's disappearance was a complete accident or intentional. This is one of those strange aspects of the incident that seems to point to the disappearance being carried out intentionally. As to who was behind it all, we'll get to those questions in a bit. But first, the facts. The flight took off and everything was standard procedure at first. An automated position report was sent to air traffic control at 1:06 a.m., but then the aircraft's communication systems were deliberately turned off, starting with the aircraft communications addressing and reporting system, aka the ACARS, is used to automatically send out periodic updates to air traffic control about the status of the plane, fuel levels, that sort of thing. So why was this shut off? Well, it's obviously highly suspect. If the plane had crashed completely by accident, it would be a pretty big coincidence for this communication shutdown to have been completely unrelated. Seems more like someone was intentionally wanting to go off the grid. That brings us to the next fishy fact about the 370's disappearance, though, the lack of a distress signal. If the pilots had realized there was something wrong and weren't ill-intentioned, they would have sent out a distress signal. At 1:19 a.m., the last verbal transmission came in from the plane, just before they were about to enter into Vietnamese airspace. It's not 100% certain if the voice belonged to Captain Zari or co-pilot Farik Abdul Hamid, but they said, Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9, good night. Traffic control didn't notice any distress in the voice. Everything seemed completely routine. So next is the transponder shutdown. A few minutes after the final verbal transmission, Flight 370's transponder was shut off. This was much more noticeable than the ACARS shutting off because the transponder sends out data constantly. So now the flight appeared on radar screens as this unidentified aircraft. Now this was pretty strange, but it wasn't a cause for alarm yet, just a bit confusing. At this point though, it's pretty hard to chalk all this up to being a complete accident. First of all, the ACARS is not easy to turn off. Unless there was something wrong with the plane, it would have needed to be shut off manually. And for the transponder to then go off as well, that's no coincidence. So something was going on here. Either someone had taken control of the plane, or the captain, co-pilot, or both were responsible. And here's what I believe to be the biggest piece of evidence pointing to this disappearance being deliberate on some level: the bizarre flight path of the plane. So soon after the transponder was shut down, the plane just changed course. At this point, nobody knew this was Flight 370, as again, It was now appearing as an unidentified craft, but it made some very odd movements after it cut off its communication. It made a series of erratic turns and altitude changes, going way off from its planned route. It first made a sharp turn, redirecting its route. It's around this time, about 1:37 a.m., that air traffic control in Malaysia realizes that the ACARS report is overdue. It's at this time, about 1:37 a.m., that air traffic control in Malaysia realizes that the ACARS report is overdue, and now they start to get worried. It looks like this unidentified craft is Flight 370. But the problem was, because of all this confusion, crucial time had been lost in intercepting the plane. It was still being picked up primarily by military radar, but it kept flying west for several hours further over the Indian Ocean, and it became harder and harder to detect. At 2:40 a.m., Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 was officially declared missing. Satellite data indicated that the plane continued flying for several hours after disappearing from radar before likely running out of fuel. Now, there are a lot of theories as to who is behind this incident, one of the main suspects being the captain himself, Zahri Ahmad Shah. There are several clues that point to this, one of them being his flight simulator data. In 2016, some pretty shocking news came out. Shah had a flight simulator at his home. A secret document from the Malaysian police investigation was leaked, showing that the FBI checked the captain's simulator. They found that he had simulated a flight path that closely matched the route the actual plane took over the Indian Ocean before disappearing. This information was not shared with the public in the official investigation report, so pretty obvious what this shows. Some people believe this is strong evidence that the captain intentionally caused the plane to disappear, wanting to take his own life as well as the lives of the passengers. But the fact that Malaysian authorities kept this information secret is a little suspect. Both the FBI and the Australian Transport Safety Bureau confirmed the findings about the flight simulation. The Malaysian government acknowledged the existence of the simulation, but kind of downplayed how significant this little clue was, stating that there was nothing sinister about it. Now that's going to lead us right into the next point. There's also a conspiracy theory that started to form during the frustrating investigation for the plane. Many family members of the missing victims, and many in the general public as well, started becoming very critical and even suspicious of Malaysian authorities and how they were handling the investigation. When the plane disappeared, Malaysian officials provided info that was unclear, incomplete, sometimes incorrect. There were contradictions between civilian and military leaders, and people started to question the accuracy of the details, especially when it came to the last known location and contact time with the aircraft. First of all, there was a delay in sharing crucial information. Satellite data from Inmarsat showed that the plane might have taken a different route, but this info wasn't made public until several days after it was received. Malaysia also initially hesitated to release raw data from its military radar, deeming it too sensitive. China was also very critical of Malaysia's lack of transparency during the investigation, urging Malaysia to lead the operation more effectively and share information openly. So, was there something going on behind closed doors that we just don't know about? Was there a cover-up of some kind, or were they just doing a bad job at relaying information? Now, it wasn't just the public Malaysia Airlines were slow to give updates to. They took some time to inform other agencies that the plane had gone missing, a delay that could have messed up the entire search. There was about an hour delay in between the airline realizing the plane had gone missing until they reached out to agencies like the military and air traffic controllers in surrounding countries to alert them of this incident. Crucial time was lost in finding the plane before it went down. Fact is, this should have been declared an emergency way sooner. When they were asked why there was this hour-long delay, Malaysia Airlines responded by saying they'd kept searching for the plane, wanting to make sure it had actually gone missing. So, was this just a simple case of things being mismanaged, or was there something else going on here? A possible cover-up? Or Is there a more otherworldly explanation? Yes, ever since this plane disappeared, there have been some pretty wild conspiracy theories, one of them being that aliens were involved. I think it's hard for people to really wrap their heads around the wreckage of a huge aircraft like this not turning up. So the logical explanation for them is, well, aliens had to have taken them away. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying aliens don't exist. I think if you've watched me long enough now, you know I think there's a high probability that there are aliens out there. And I guess it's possible aliens could have taken control of the plane, caused it to zip around off its flight path before beaming them up to their ship. But, I mean, is that likely? No, not really. The Indian Ocean is vast, it's deep. If this plane plummeted into the water, it may have sunk very fast, and considering how delayed the search and rescue was, there's a good chance it just sunk to a depth that made it next to impossible to find. And I'm going to close things out with a theory that is admittedly highly speculative, but also pretty interesting. So this is something that a British aviation expert named Richard Godfrey proposed. He thinks that there could have been a political motive behind Flight 370's disappearance, and that Captain Zari Ahmad Shah was behind it. Now, according to Godfrey, Captain Zari was a supporter of the Malaysia opposition and knew its leader, Anwar Ibrahim. Anwar Ibrahim was sentenced to 5 years in prison a day before the plane took off. Some claim these charges were false and politically motivated, so Godfrey speculates that Zari, angered by Ibrahim's imprisonment, might have hijacked the plane as a form of political protest or to negotiate his release. There was a 22-minute time span where the plane circled mysteriously. This could have been when Zari was negotiating Ibrahim's release. Now, this may sound a bit far-fetched, but it could partially explain why information about the case seemed to be withheld or covered up. What do you all think, though? As always, leave your thoughts down in the comments section below. I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.